My fiancée looked at me before we got out of the car and said, "Just stay quiet today. Don't make everything about you." I stared at her for a second and asked, "What does that mean?" She rolled her eyes. "Just don't talk too much." I said, "Okay." 3 months later, our wedding was cancelled, and half her family knew exactly why. When people hear that story, they usually assume something huge happened at that reunion. It didn't. At least not at first. The reunion was simply the moment I finally stopped explaining away behavior that had been building for years. I was 32, worked in commercial construction management, and had been with my fiancée, Lauren, for almost 4 years. We lived together. Wedding venue booked. Deposits paid. Guest list nearly finished. From the outside, everything looked solid. And honestly, for a long time, I believed it was. Lauren wasn't a bad person. That's important. If she had been obviously cruel, I would have left much sooner. Instead, she was the kind of person who always had a reason. Always an explanation. Always a way to make disrespect sound reasonable. Early in our relationship, it showed up as jokes. If we were with friends and I told a story, she'd interrupt. "That's not how it happened." Or, "He's leaving out the embarrassing part." Everyone would laugh, including me. It seemed harmless. Then she'd make comments about my clothes. "You really wore that." Or, "Thank God I picked your outfit." Again, small things. Nothing worth arguing over. At least that's what I told myself. Over time, those comments became normal. If I disagreed with her about anything in public, she'd correct me immediately. Not because I was wrong, because she hated not having the final word. One night after dinner with friends, I finally mentioned it. I said, "Do you realize you interrupt me a lot?" She laughed. "You're being sensitive." That became one of her favorite phrases. Sensitive, dramatic, defensive. Everything became my reaction instead of her behavior. Still, I stayed, because 90% of the time, things were good. Or at least good enough. Then her mother entered the picture more aggressively after our engagement. Her mother, Diane, loved control. Loved it. If Lauren wanted blue flowers, Diane wanted white. If Lauren picked a venue, Diane had 3 better suggestions. Every conversation became a negotiation. I expected Lauren to establish boundaries. Instead, she adjusted herself to keep her mother happy. And slowly, she expected me to do the same. The first time I noticed it clearly was during wedding planning. Diane criticized the menu. I disagreed. Politely. I said, "I think guests will enjoy it." Diane looked annoyed. Lauren immediately jumped in. "Let's not argue." I wasn't arguing. I had answered a question. Afterward, I mentioned it in the car. "You shut me down pretty quickly." Lauren sighed heavily. "Because I didn't want my mom upset." "What about me?" "It's different." That answer stuck with me. It's different. Meaning her feelings mattered. Mine were negotiable. A few weeks later, we attended a birthday dinner for one of her cousins. Halfway through dinner, someone asked how wedding planning was going. Before I could answer, Lauren laughed. "He's basically just funding it." Everyone laughed, including me. But I remember feeling strangely embarrassed, because I had actually spent months helping organize everything. Venue visits, vendor meetings, budgets, contracts. But in front of everyone, I became the guy writing checks. That night, I said nothing. Another warning sign ignored. Then came the reunion. Lauren's family hosted one every summer. Nearly 50 relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. The whole family. The drive there felt normal until we pulled into the parking lot. That's when she delivered the sentence. "Just stay quiet today." I looked at her. "What?" She adjusted her makeup in the mirror. My family already thinks you're kind of intense. I've met them dozens of times. I know. Who thinks that? She shrugged. Just don't make everything about you. I sat there quietly, because I genuinely couldn't understand where it was coming from. I wasn't loud. I wasn't argumentative. Most people described me as reserved. So hearing that felt strange. But I let it go. Again. Inside, things started normally. People greeted us. Food was everywhere. Kids running around. Music playing. For the first hour, I barely spoke. Not intentionally. I was just processing what she'd said. Then her uncle asked me about a project I had been managing. I answered. Maybe 30 seconds. Nothing dramatic. Halfway through my answer, Lauren interrupted. We don't need the entire construction report. A few people laughed. I smiled politely. The conversation moved on. But something felt different this time. Not embarrassing. Not annoying. Disrespectful. Intentional. Later, her cousin asked how we met. Before I could answer, Lauren answered for me. Then her sister asked about honeymoon plans. Lauren answered that too. At one point, I realized I had spoken less than 5 minutes in nearly 3 hours. Every time I started contributing, Lauren redirected attention somewhere else. The worst part wasn't her family. Most of them were perfectly pleasant. The worst part was that she seemed proud of it. Like managing me. Like controlling the conversation. Toward evening, her grandfather sat beside me. Very quiet man. He asked about my father. We started talking. Just two people having a normal conversation. Then Lauren appeared. Are you giving Grandpa another lecture? Her grandfather looked confused. So did I. I said, we're talking. She folded her arms. Can you not do this today? I stood up. Do what? She lowered her voice. You're making people uncomfortable. I looked around. Nobody looked uncomfortable. Nobody except me. I said, can we talk outside for a minute? She sighed dramatically and followed me. The moment we stepped outside, I asked the question I'd been holding all day. What exactly is your issue with me today? Her expression hardened immediately. And then came the sentence that changed everything. I shouldn't have to manage your behavior, but somebody has to. I remember staring at Lauren for a few seconds after she said it. Not because I was angry, because I was genuinely shocked. Manage my behavior. Yes. What behavior? She crossed her arms. This. This what? The fact that you're making this into a thing. That conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. And somehow I left it feeling like I had done something wrong. That's how most of our conflicts worked by then. I would raise a concern. She would focus on my reaction. The original issue disappeared. When we got home that night, I tried again. Calmly. I said, I need you to explain why you kept shutting me down today. She didn't even look up from her phone. You're still thinking about that? Yes. It wasn't a big deal. Then why do it? She shrugged. I was joking. The familiar pattern. If it hurt me, it was a joke. If I questioned it, I was sensitive. If I persisted, I was creating drama. A week later, I brought it up one final time. I wasn't looking for an apology. I wanted clarity. Instead, I got something more revealing. Lauren said, my family just has a certain image of us. What image? That we're balanced. I frowned. What does that mean? She hesitated, then said something I'd never forgot. It means people expect me to be the social one. And sometimes you can dominate conversations. I almost laughed. Anyone who knew me would have said the opposite. But facts didn't matter. The narrative mattered. For the first time, I started paying attention instead of defending myself. And once I started paying attention, patterns appeared everywhere. At restaurants, she'd order for me without asking. Around friends, she'd correct harmless details. If I disagreed with her publicly, she'd revisit it privately for hours. If she disagreed with me publicly, I was expected to accept it. Double standards. Everywhere. Then came Diane. Lauren's mother seemed to become more involved every week. Wedding decisions. Apartment decisions. Financial decisions. Everything. One evening, Diane suggested we move closer to her neighborhood. I said it didn't make sense for my commute. Lauren immediately replied, "We're still considering it." No, we weren't. That discussion hadn't happened. Later I asked why she'd said that. Her answer was immediate. Because I didn't want Mom disappointed. Again, the same answer. Eventually, I asked a harder question. When was the last time you prioritized my feelings over hers? Lauren got angry instantly. Not thoughtful. Not reflective. Angry. Because deep down, I think she already knew the answer. A month after the reunion, another incident pushed everything forward. We attended a family barbecue. During dinner, Diane started discussing wedding seating arrangements. She openly suggested removing several members of my family to make room for hers. I said, "We're not doing that." Simple, polite, reasonable. Diane looked irritated. Then Lauren spoke. "Let's talk about this later." I looked at her. "No, we're talking about it now." Her expression changed. Not embarrassment. Annoyance. Like I had broken an unwritten rule. After dinner, she exploded in the car. "You embarrassed my mother." I answered her. "You challenged her." Because she wanted to remove my family from the wedding. "You're overreacting." That word again. Overreacting. At that point, I stopped arguing. Not because I agreed. Because I was exhausted. I started noticing something else. Whenever Lauren told stories about our disagreements, details disappeared. She'd tell friends half the story. Tell her mother selective versions. Present herself as the reasonable one managing a difficult partner. I discovered that accidentally. One evening, I overheard a phone conversation. She was talking to her sister. "I never know what mood he'll be in." I nearly laughed. I was probably the most predictable person she'd ever dated. But reality wasn't the issue anymore. Image was. Control was. Approval was. Then everything clicked during a conversation with her grandfather. The same grandfather she'd interrupted at the reunion. I ran into him at a community event. We talked for 20 minutes. Before leaving, he said something interesting. "You're quieter than Lauren describes." That sentence hit me like a brick, because it confirmed something I had suspected. She wasn't just disrespecting me privately. She had been creating a version of me publicly. One that justified her behavior. One that made her look patient. One that made me look difficult. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and realized the truth. The problem wasn't the reunion. The problem wasn't Diane. The problem wasn't wedding stress. The problem was a pattern. A pattern where my role was simple. Support her. Fund the plans. Stay agreeable. Accept correction. Avoid conflict. And never challenge the narrative. The next few weeks became strangely peaceful. Because I stopped trying to convince her. No more explanations. No more debates. No more requests for understanding. Just observation. Lauren noticed eventually. One night she asked, "Why are you being weird?" "I'm not." "You're distant." I nodded. Maybe. She hated that answer, because it gave her nothing to fight. Then came the ultimatum. We were reviewing wedding expenses when another argument started. Diane wanted additional guests. I said no. Lauren said yes. Back and forth for 10 minutes. Finally, I said, "Why does your mother get more input than your future husband?" Lauren slammed her notebook shut. "If you don't trust me, maybe we shouldn't be getting married." The room went silent. She expected negotiation, expected reassurance, expected pursuit. Instead, I looked at her and said, "You're right." For the first time in years, she looked completely unprepared. The moment I agreed with her, something shifted. Not dramatically, quietly. Lauren expected resistance, expected a conversation, expected me to chase the relationship the way I always had before. Instead, I stood up, collected my notes, and went for a walk. That night, she followed me from room to room. "You're seriously upset?" I answered calmly, "No." "Then what's happening?" "I think you're right." "About what?" "Maybe we shouldn't get married." For the first time, I saw uncertainty in her face. Not regret. Not yet. Just confusion. Over the next week, I stopped discussing wedding plans entirely. No arguments. No negotiations. No emotional speeches. I simply stopped participating. Lauren initially treated it like a temporary mood. Then reality started setting in. Vendors began contacting us. Deadlines approached. Decisions needed approval. And I wasn't engaging. One evening she asked, "Are you really willing to throw everything away?" I said, "No." "Then why are you acting like this?" "I'm acting like someone listening to what you said." That answer ended the conversation. Karma arrived faster than I expected. Wave 1 started with the wedding itself. After several difficult discussions, I cancelled my portion of the arrangements and informed Lauren I was stepping back completely. Not out of anger, out of clarity. If someone genuinely questioned whether we should marry, I wasn't going to convince them otherwise. The wedding was postponed, then effectively cancelled. Financially, it was painful. Emotionally, it was strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't managing someone else's expectations. Then came the evidence chain. Not cheating, not some secret affair. Something much simpler, and honestly more damaging. Several relatives reached out after hearing the wedding was off. Among them was her grandfather, then a cousin, then an aunt. Separate conversations. Same theme. They were surprised, because Lauren had spent years describing me as controlling, intense, stubborn, and difficult. The problem: none of them had actually experienced that version of me. Once the engagement ended, they started comparing notes. The stories stopped matching reality. Clue, then proof, then witnesses, then confirmation. Her grandfather finally told me directly, "Most of us thought you were different because of how she talked about you." That hurt more than any argument, because it meant the disrespect had been happening long before I recognized it. Not openly, quietly, consistently. Karma Wave 2 hit shortly afterward. The social support Lauren expected never fully materialized. Some relatives took her side. Others didn't. But many started asking uncomfortable questions. Questions about why she constantly corrected me. Questions about why Diane controlled so many wedding decisions. Questions about why every conflict somehow became my fault. The narrative she'd built for years started cracking. Not because I exposed her, because I stayed silent. People noticed the difference themselves. That's what surprised me most. I didn't have to convince anyone. I simply stopped defending myself. Months later, I accepted a promotion that required relocating. Nothing glamorous, just a better position with better opportunities. A fresh start. When people ask whether the promotion caused the breakup, the answer is no. The breakup made me willing to accept the promotion. I wasn't organizing my life around someone else's approval anymore. Then came Karma Wave 3. About 6 months after the wedding was cancelled, Lauren called. The conversation lasted maybe 15 minutes. She sounded different. Not angry. Not defensive. Tired. She admitted family relationships had become complicated. Her mother was frustrated. Relatives were asking questions. People weren't automatically validating her anymore. Eventually, she said, "I didn't think you'd actually leave." There it was. The truth. Not hidden. Not complicated. Just simple. She genuinely believed the relationship would survive anything. Any criticism. Any disrespect. Any double standard. Because it always had before. I asked her one question. Why did you tell me to stay quiet at the reunion? There was a long pause. Then she finally answered. I don't know. I think she expected a bigger reason too. But sometimes there isn't one. Sometimes people get comfortable having control. Comfortable being prioritized. Comfortable assuming the other person will absorb every small disrespect forever. We ended the call politely. No reconciliation. No dramatic conclusion. Just two people acknowledging reality. Today, I don't hate Lauren. I don't even think she's a terrible person. I think she slowly learned that love and tolerance aren't the same thing. And I learned it too. The relationship didn't end because she told me to stay quiet at her family reunion. It ended because of hundreds of moments where being respected mattered less than being managed. That sentence simply forced me to stop ignoring what those moments had been saying all along.